All right, good morning. I am taping. One thing to just tell you real quick, I maybe mentioned this the other day, I maybe did not, I don't know. Um, you are allowed 2 absences for this class, and the way we figure out absences is if you had work that was due that Sunday and you turn in nothing, you're marked as being absent. So let's assume that student A did not take the test yesterday and does not turn any work in for chapters 1 through 3 at all. Well, then student A is going to be marked absent. If you get 2 absences, that's the max. So if you were to get what happens is I have to kick you out of. Now, it's not that I want to do it. That's just the protocol for ranking. If that happens, now sometimes stuff like that happens and somebody gets COVID, or they get sick, or they're in an accident or whatever. If something like that were to happen, please let me know right away, as soon as you can, at least. All right. And I will work with you on it. Also, if you think that, well, yeah, I was kicked out of this class and that was unjust, you can still keep doing the work, and let me know if you're going to appeal it, because there's just a form you have to fill out. All right. So if something like that happens, please, just like I said, just let me know. All right. So yesterday we did the first test, which was on chapters 1 through 3. And I will grade that test this weekend. All right. By Monday, it'll all, hopefully I'll have everything graded this weekend. Now, today we're going to be ambitious. We'll see if we get done with all this or not. But I'd like to cover 3 chapters, chapters 5, 6, and 7. There's not a whole lot in chapter 6 to cover. So it's basically on 5 and 7. So the next test that you will take, and it'll already be next week, all right, will be on chapters 4 through 7. Now, I'm not trying to throw this stuff or push it down your throat. So let's talk about today. Like I said, we'll go through hopefully chapters 5 through 7. Tomorrow will be a lab period. We're going to try something different, I think, at least on Monday. We'll build a website as a class. All right. I'm not sure what it'll be yet, because I'm going to do it either tonight or this weekend. All right. But you'll have all the code and everything, but I think it'll give us a chance to really try to put together what we've done thus far. All right. And then Tuesday, we'll have another of these pre-tests. Okay. Where again, I will go over what I want you to do. It'll be based on the regular test, and I'll give you an hour to work on it, and then I'll go over it. All right. And then Wednesday of next week, we would have the test then on chapters 4 through 7. All right. And we'll see how it goes. If we have to sit and adjust that in any way, then we'll do that. All right. Please remember, as it says here in the bowl down at the bottom, your chapters 1 through 3 written tests, labs, and homework are due this Sunday by midnight. Now, we actually went over the labs and the homework together, and that was taped. So if you weren't present for that, you haven't watched it, you can go and basically you can just take a look at it. All right, watch the tape, but you are responsible. We did the chapter 1 written test together as a class, but you're responsible on your own for doing the chapters 2 and 3 written tests. All right, with all that said, then let's jump into the text. And again, what it, the test was on chapters 1 through 3. All right. We've also gone over chapter 4 on how to use CSS to. So today, 5, 6, and 7. 5 is on the CSS box model, which we're going to get into in a lot of depth in a couple minutes. Then chapter 6 is on page layout. All right. Now they have literally 2/3 of that chapter is on how to lay out things in different ways. Of course, we're going to look at that. And then they talk about how you can put things on a page. Okay, that's the thing we're going to concentrate the most on. Then we'll get into chapter 7. And the reason I thought we could do this today is we've already covered a lot of the material for chapter 7. We've talked about ordered lists. We've talked about unordered lists. There's something else that's called a data list, which isn't used very often, but we'll mention it like in passing. You know how to create links or hyperlinks, so we'll talk about that. And then you'll be also shown how to do navigation menus. So again, 4, 5, 6, and 7, these four here will be what your test will be on next week. Then after that, towards the end of next week, we'll go over chapters 8, 9, and 10. All right. And now this is me talking. You may disagree with this once we get through it, but probably 9 and 10 are the two hardest rather chapters in this book. And the reason for that is it's a different way to lay out web pages. All right. So we'll really slow it down to go over both of those, and we'll go over some examples of that. All right. So not next week, but the test you'll take after that will be on 8, 9, and 10. All right. So let's just jump into it here. And I want to go all the way out to chapter 5, which is page 143. Now, this chapter is on what is called the CSS box model. And I want to show you something regarding that. I thought I had it up here and I didn't, so I'm going to bring it up right now. All right. Now, this is not the same picture that's in your book. This is the box model right here. But the idea of this picture and what's in your book are the same. All right. I just thought this one was a little picturesque, so to speak. Anytime you create anything on a web page, so where that says content there, that could be a sentence, that could be an image, that could be something else. That could be, basically a hyperlink. It could be you're going to learn how to link to YouTube, etc. It could be anything like that. That's content. All right. And content has something that basically, okay, all content, everything you put on a web page has padding, it has border, and it has margin. And you might say, well, I haven't seen it. My stuff doesn't look like this. Well, you have to basically set up padding. You have to set up a border, and you have to set up margin. All right. And if you say, I don't understand, you will hopefully by the time we finish up with this chapter. So you've got content, padding is what surrounds the content, border is what surrounds the padding, and margin is what surrounds the border. Now, you're going to learn some new terminology in here today, and I will tell you two things. First of all, the way that you set things up for border is we're going to do it in two ways, just so you see it. All right. There's what I'd call an easier way and a harder way. We'll look at both. And then when we get to margin and padding, basically the way they're set up is the same. All right. And if that doesn't make sense, again, hopefully it will in a couple minutes. The other thing to realize about this is if I go out here, and I'm dating myself when I show you this, but if I go out to, and I'm going to put in here analog clock. All right. And it doesn't matter which one we grab. This is a nice bright one. So right here. Now, what we're going to talk about in just a couple minutes, the reason I put this up here is that when we talk about something on a page, again, it doesn't matter what it is, that content. This right here at 12 o'clock, that's the top. This right here at 3 o'clock, that's the right. This right here at 6, that's the bottom. Here at number 9 is the left. Why am I telling you that? Because again, going back to this, what I'm telling you is with the content right here, this would be the top of the content. That would be the right of the content. That would be the bottom of the content. That would be the left of the content. And it's top, right, bottom, left, whether you're talking about content or padding or border or margin. All right, they all work that way. So they say that in here. They give some explanation, and notice what it says. Content is basically That's where usually it's going to be a text or images, but it's your web page content. Padding, as it says, is the area around the content. It is transparent. Why am I telling you that? Because technically, when you put in padding, all right, when you put in padding, all you're doing is you're giving it a size. You're not giving it a color or anything else. Border, you can do that. You can give it a size, you can give it a color, and you're going to see that in just a moment. But if you notice here, it says for padding, clears an area around the content. All right. And for margin, it says clears an area outside the border. And with both of them, they say that they're transparent. So part of the key to understanding this is to be, to understanding CSS is to be able to use the box model. All right. So I'm going to use this demonstration that they show right here. I made my own, but this one will work just fine. So we're creating a div. And what's a div? Well, basically it's a division. It's a holder, but we're saying that we want this thing to be 300 pixels wide. If you say, I don't know what that means, you'll see it in a minute. All right. But you'll notice when you look on here, this div has a border, it has padding, and it has margin. And this is how we're going to look at this so you can understand what each one of these means. So I'm going to bring this up, and here it is right here. All right, so we've got a background color, light gray. Notice if I come in right away and just make this white as an example, you can immediately see the difference in here. Okay, so the width is 300 pixels. Notice again, if I knock that down to 100 pixels, you can see how that changes. All right. Now none of that is really new. You should already have at least an understanding of background color. I think it was light gray. All right. And you should have an understanding of width, at least what they do. That should make sense to everybody. All right. So that's the way it looked when we started. Now, border, there's different ways that we can do this. This is the easy way because we're specifying for the border the size, the type, and the color all on one line. So notice if I change this from 15 pixels to 5 pixels, oops, not 55, to 5 pixels, and I make it, for example, blue. All right. Watch how much thinner it gets and the color changes. All right. So again, hopefully at least that makes sense. The thicker the number that you put in here, all right, or the bigger the number, the thicker the border is going to be. All right. Now, okay, that's all fine. What's padding? Well, right now the padding is 50 pixels. That's the area that's in the box here where we don't have anything. Notice if I change that from 50 pixels to 5 pixels, this is going to look very cramped now. Notice that I still have a little bit in here. That's 5 pixels worth here all the way around, but there's almost nothing in here. All right. Margin is very hard to show you right now, so I'm going to make it easier to show you. All right. I'm going to change the width on this, and I'm going to change the width to 200. Okay. And there's a reason I'm doing this. You'll see in just a minute. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in here, we've got this. This is the div that we've got in here. All right. And what I'm going to do is inside of this div or this thing that's in our body right here, this H2, etc. This is the div right here where it says the text, etc. I'm going to go and I'm going to copy, and I'm going to put another one right below it. Now, notice when I run it, there it is right below. Well, I don't want it below that. I want them to hopefully at least be side by side with one another. So how do I do that? I'm going to put a div inside of my div. So there's one div, that's the beginning of it. And here will be the end of it. See if it works or not. It should. All right. Well, You can see right now I do have two of them, and they're inside of another div. It's not exactly what I wanted to show you. All right. But one thing that will allow us to do is I'm going to come in here, and where I've got margin 20% or 20 pixels rather, I'm going to make it 120 pixels and run it again. Now what you see is the area that's between these two things, how it has changed. All right. So what am I, that's all fine and dandy. What am I trying to get across in here? Well, let's get rid of this div that we put here. All right. We can do it as two divs. It'll work just fine. Okay. So we've got this now. We've got these two divs. Okay. And right now, these two divs are being handled the same. So notice if I come back in here and I change the background color, let's just make it, I don't know, let's make it orange. Right? If I do that, the background color changes to orange on both of them, because up here, I said the background color for all divs is going to be this. If I change the width back to what it was originally, which was 300 pixels, oops. So if I go back and change it to 300 pixels and run it, they're both thicker. And again, that should all make sense to you. If I change the border, so I'm going to change this again to 15 pixels, and there's different kind of borders you can create. For instance, I'm going to type here dotted. All right. And instead of blue, let's make it green. And I run it. And now you can see the difference, and they're both acting the same. All right. Then we've got, so padding is this area again that you see that is between. All right, that is the area that's between the content, which is these words, and the border. All right, so let's change this back to solid because it's just a little bit easier to look at. And let's change the padding. So I'm going to make that solid again, just like it was. And I'm going to change padding from 5 pixels to 25 pixels, and watch how the area in here will expand. All right, and you can hopefully see that in here. In fact, in both of them. All right. And then finally, the margin is the area that's between, in this case, this div and this div. So notice if I change it from 120 pixels down to 20, the area that's in between these is going to shrink a lot. See that? All right. If I wanted to treat these two things differently, so in other words, if I didn't want both of them to be green like this, if I didn't want that, all right. Well, then, for example, I could come in here and put in a class here. I'm going to call this first div. All right. And then underneath this, I'm going to copy everything, but I'll change what's inside of it in just a moment. And I'm going to call this second div. And the first div will keep everything the way it is. With the second div, we'll kind of reverse it. In other words, we'll say the background color is green. All right. We'll say that the border is 15 pixels solid orange, and we'll keep everything else the same. Now, if I run it, this isn't going to look at all like you think it'll look. All right. And the reason for that is I have not associated those divs with first div and with second div. So let's do that right now. So where it says div here, I'll say class equals first div. I didn't do the second one yet. So now notice the first one's set and the second one is not. All right. So to do the second one, I have to do the same thing. So I'll come in here and say class equals second. And if I run it, there's my first div and there's my second div, where again, you can see it's pretty much been reversed. So instead of having a green border, we've got an orange border. Instead of having an orange background, we have a green background. And we could change anything on here we wanted to, So for instance, we could come in here and say color for our text. All right. And we could make this first one, I don't know what would even look good here, but we could say brown. And for the second one that's in here, All right, so that is the second one. So for the first one, we can say color white. And again, we can use hex values, etc., like we've been using, and you'll notice right away how it looks different. So what I just attempted to show you there is a couple different things. First of all, what the box model represents. All right, so again, going back to what we looked at first, all CSS that you work with, it's referred to as content. All content is surrounded by padding. Padding can be set to 0, so literally there is no padding. Border, all these things, so padding and border and margin, none of them are required. All right. Border again, so that could be set to nothing, not even having a border. And margin can be set to 0 as well. So I wanted you to get that across, plus that idea of the clock where top, right, bottom, left. All right. So if you have at least a fundamental understanding of that, that's where you should be. So we're going to go through this, but I just gave you basically an introduction to the box model. Again, their picture will be a little different, but it is showing the same stuff. Then they have a web page that illustrates it. All right. As it says, we'll talk then quite a bit about margins and padding. The way that you set margins and the way you set padding are the same, except in one case you're saying margin, and in the other case you're saying padding. All right. Then we'll look at another web page, as it says, that'll show sizing and spacing. And then we'll talk about borders and background. We've talked about borders a little bit already. We have not yet talked about background. And then we'll end up with looking at another page that uses borders and uses backgrounds. As we're going through this, if something doesn't make sense, please stop me and ask. All right. So as it says, when the browser displays a web page, it places everything in a box. The key to being able to unlock this, so to speak, and to work with this stuff is to understand what the box model is all about. As they say here, padding is the space around the content area. So if you have a border like we did, it's very easy to see when you change the padding, what happens. Margin is the space between the border. Typically, it's the difference between the space between two different components or two different content components on a page. All right. And they'll go through here and it said, and they will show you this, all right, about calculating the overall height and width of a box. And there are certain things in here that you'll have to at least understand, even if you say, well, I don't know math, but you'll have to understand what they're doing and what they mean. All right. They'd also mention here, it says when you set the height and width properties, you can use any of the units we talked about in the last chapter. You can use pixels, you can use points, you can use rems, you can use ems, etc. So I could go back and we're on that example I just showed you from W3 schools, we could change all of those pixels. I think we used in there, we could change them all to rems or ems, whatever, and it would work just fine. All right. It says for now they're going to use pixels. And remember, pixels are one of those fixed measurements. All right. It says that way the size of the page won't change if the user changes the size of the browser window. What does that mean? Well, with the example we just looked at here, notice if I make my window smaller, all right, or I make it bigger, the size of that box is not changing. What shows on the screen might change, but the actual size is not changing, and that's because we used pixels. All right. If we went in and changed that, and we tried using, let's say we came in here and we said percent, not even sure exactly what's going to happen if we do this. All right. But if we run it, you can see now it looks bigger, but as we move this, now it is changing. All right. So again, you can see the difference between doing something Absolutely, and doing something relatively. All right. It says there in chapter 8, really it's chapters 8, 9, and 10, we're going to be talking about responsive web design. And what that means is we want our particular web page to look good, regardless of whether you're looking at it on a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, or a phone. All right. So we'll get into that in a week or two. So this is their picture. And it's not really different than what I showed you. I just thought that the one I showed you was a little more picturesque. They still have their content. All right. They still have their padding. There's the content. There's the padding. There's the border. And there's the margin. Like I said, I thought myself that the picture I showed you did a little better job of displaying it than this one does. All right. When you are calculating this, as they mentioned right here, you have to take into account if you are working with margin and padding, they become part of the count. What the heck does that mean? Again, going back to what we looked at in here, all right, I'm going to change this back again to pixels and this one and run it again. All right, that if we are figuring out the size of this box, not only do we have to take into account the text that's in there, but we also have to take into account the margin that's around it. I'm sorry, the padding that's around it, the border, and possibly the padding as well. All right. Now, are there ways to get around that? Are there ways? Yes, there are. We're going to get into those. So I don't want to read to you. Take a look at what's up here because they're explaining the box model, they're explaining margin, and they're explaining padding. All right. So they've got this page, as it says here, that demonstrates the box model. So I'm not going to look at that, but again, you might find this easy to look at, hard to look at. I don't know. But what they have here is if you noticed, okay, we've got two different boxes. We've got two different content areas in here. Each content area that you see in here has its own content, has its own padding around it, all right, has its own border around it, all right, and has its own margin in between these two things. In addition, in addition, we've got like a div or something else where we've got a border around both of our contents, and then we've got a border around that. So there's all sorts of things that you can do here for effect. All right. I mean, to me, that to me looks terrible. But I think what they're just trying to do here is to demonstrate what's going on. And you can see here, for example, with H1s, and this gets a little confusing, so let's take a quick look at it. Notice when you set margin and when you set padding, when we looked at it over here, all right, when we looked at this example and we said margin 20 pixels, okay, this is a shortcut. Right here, this is the same thing as saying margin top 20 pixels, margin bottom 20 pixels, margin, and the order in which you put these in here really doesn't matter. Right, 20 pixels, margin left, 20 pixels. So in other words, if you just say margin and you give it a size, you're telling it to apply it to the top, to the bottom, to the right, and to the left. So that's a shortcut. I don't know about you, but if you tell me I can type in one line or I can type in 4 lines, okay, I'll take that. I'll take the one line. Now, if I do this and I type in 20 pixels right here, and then I'm going to show you this because I want this to make sense to you. And I put in 100 pixels here. This says I want 20 pixels top and bottom, but I want 100 pixels right and left. So after I've done this and I click run, all right, kind of hard to see how it's changed. But the idea is when you put in two of them like this, the first one that you put in is for the top and bottom, and the second one that you put in is for the right and the left. All right. And if you say, well, that's really confusing, if it's confusing, you can use all of them. So notice there's a padding left, for example. So there's different ways that you can do this. There's different types of shortcuts. If that confuses you, if that does confuse you, don't use the shortcuts. Margin hyphen left, margin hyphen right, margin hyphen top, margin hyphen bottom, and padding hyphen left, padding hyphen right, padding hyphen top, padding hyphen bottom. And it works just fine. All right. How to size and space elements. The next thing that's in here is, if you notice, they talk about auto. It says figure 5.3 presents the properties for setting heights and width. The two properties you use most often are width and height. These are set to a value of auto. As a result, the content is automatically adjusted so it's as wide as the widest element, and it's as tall as the tallest element. And you can change that in a lot of different ways. So if we take a look here, these are things that you can display for width and for height. Okay. Now, if you look, you'll notice that there's a min width, a max width, a min height, and a max height. All right. Sometimes what people do is they set a max, for example, a max width maybe of, I don't know, 700 pixels. And I can actually show you what that is by with what I've got on my screen here. So what that would mean is that might be 700 pixels right there. So that's as big as the screen is going to be width-wise. And I can do the same thing height-wise. So if 700 pixels height-wise was this, that would say the maximum size of my screen would be set up like this. All right. And you can set this up for a screen. You can set this up for elements that are on a screen. All right. So they start by talking about the content area. Okay. And notice the difference between these three things that are shown in here, please. All right. Notice the difference. All right. In the first one that we have here, we've got an absolute width. All right. So basically that's unchanging. Second one is a relative width. So it'll try to change based on whatever the screen size is. All right. And the last one, as it says, it's the default. Okay. Now we're going to look again at a little bit. We talked about this yesterday. It was on your test where you should have used that margin set to auto. When you set it to auto, it's supposed to automatically at least attempt to center things on a page. I showed you that example of that the other day. So you can set width, you can set height, you can set width and height. So we could have both of those together. And you can set minimum and maximum sizes. All right. So as it says here, if you specify a percent, the width is based on the width of the block that contains it, also called the containing block. This really won't make a lot of sense, in my opinion, unless you go back and, as an example, you look at some of this stuff. All right. And really try to break it down to see exactly what's happening. The good news is you do have all this stuff that's in your book, because what I sent you at the beginning of the semester here, all right, for both books, is you've got a thing in there that says student download, and in there it's got the book apps. So I'm in chapter 5 right now, I guess. And there's the town hall one. And it may not have everything right here, but it's going to have in here, you'll notice there's one, and there's number two, all right, and there's number three. And there's going to be different stuff in here. We haven't talked about it yet in this chapter, but this is a gradient, and you'll notice how its color has changed. And here we actually have a container, and we made it rounded. Not only that, when you look at this, notice how we've actually done some floating in here, because when you float, what's going to happen is our um, title right here is right, it's right to the right of our image. If we didn't float, this title, the San Joaquin Valley Town Hall and this Bringing Cutting Edge, that would be, they would both be underneath our image. All right. And again, it's funny, I was talking to the afternoon class yesterday, and they weren't laughing, but they kind of were, because they hear me say this all the time. There's absolutely no way that I can cover 100% of what's in this book. I never try to not show you something that I consider to be important, all right? Or something that you will, in my opinion, at least you'll need, but things fall through the cracks. It is really important. I mean, this book isn't just meant to be a reference. The best thing that you can do for yourself is to look at the book before, we go over a chapter. And then if you have questions, you'll be able to ask too. Now, they talk in here about this margin, and the same thing will go for padding, these shorthand properties. All right. As it says, let's take a look at the examples. So this is like the one I showed you before, but I used pixels. And that's the same thing as saying margin top, margin right, margin bottom, margin left, all of them are 1em. This one right here says the top and the bottom should be 0, meaning no margin, and the left and the right, or right and left, should both be 1em. All right, you can put 3 in there, and then that's the top, that's the right and the left, and that's the bottom. Or you can specify all 4. All right, so the difference between this first one and the last one is this is 1em all the way across. But here we want each one of these possibly to be different. So that could be 10, for example, 3, 4, and 6. And padding, again, works the same way. Remember that margin basically is the area that's between two elements. Padding is the area around an element. So padding is what exists between the content and the border. All right. Margin is what's between the border, okay, and really whatever's next to it. All right, so the examples they show here basically are the same as the ones that are here. All right. So here's where, as it says, they're going to show some spacing. Now, when you look, they've started again, like I said, to actually bring this out. Let's take a look at what's in here that's different. Some of it I've already mentioned. Notice they've come in here and they've used text shadow. All right. Again, there should be some floating in there, and that's how you were able to put this basically right to the right of the actual image. All right. There we did a text align, and that's a text align right to right justify what's there. And when you look in here, not on this page, but on this one, here, they'll show you the CSS. So when you're looking at this, as you'd probably guess, what you want to do is take a look at what's yellow or mustard colored on here. And even if you're looking at it on your screen, if for some reason it's not showing in a color, it should, but if it doesn't, it'll at least have the box around it. This right here says when we start, we want there to be no padding or no margin when we start for our H1 tags, for our H2 tags, for our H3 tags, and for our paragraphs. Now later, we go in and we set padding, all right? But this is turning it off, and then later we turn it on. The order in which you put these things is very, very important, all right? Because the last one rules. And what I mean is, Had we taken this thing right here that says padding, I'm sorry, P, font size 95, padding 25, etc. Had we taken that and put it above this line here, all right, this line would have turned that padding off. All right. So much change things so you can see what happens. All right. Now what they've done is instead of doing some of this stuff right here where they set the margin of the padding, now they're coming in and putting their money where their mouth is. Myers reset, this is the universal selector, which says when I start, I want there to be no margin around anything. I want there to be no padding around anything. And sometimes people ask and they say, okay, I kind of even get what that means, but why? Why would you even want to do that? And the answer is remember that by default, each different type of browser, so Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, Chrome, Firefox, Opera, Safari, etc. They all have their own default margin and padding they put on things that go onto web pages. What we're saying here is whatever they put in there by default, we want to get rid of it. That way we can come in here and we can set our margin and we can set our padding ourselves. And ideally, at least, it should look the same on each and every browser, regardless of browser type. All right. Now, what you're going to notice when we get into chapters 8, 9, and 10, when we talk about responsive web design, it's going to change a little bit because, again, that what I just said is fine and dandy. But I want to make sure, I can have something to me, again, this looks fine. If I'm looking at this page right here, it looks just fine. But if I had it on my phone, it would be way too wide. So I might have to change different things to, depending on what I'm using to view this, is what I'm saying. All right. Then next they talk about borders. Now, notice it says borders and backgrounds. They're not the same thing. All right. So when we look in here and we start to look at borders, there's a border left and a border right. And they pretty much look the way you'd expect them to look. So what I put in there by not putting in any of those, by just saying border, that's a shortcut for border top, border right, border bottom, border left. In other words, it has the border all the way around it. That's pretty much what they're talking about in here. Okay. There's a lot of different styles that I haven't shown you. I would venture to guess that probably well over 90% of the time when you are setting a border type or a border style, you'll use basically solid. But if you look here, you can have dotted, dashed, solid, a double border, a grooved border, a ridged border, an inset border, an outset border, and no border whatsoever, which, as it says, is the default. So there's a lot of ways that you can set this stuff up. Also notice with the width, very similar to what we looked at with margin and padding. All right. So again, this says we would have a border that would have a width of 1 pixel top and bottom and 2 pixels right and left as an example. So like I said, it works the same way as what we talked about before. Now we may have the same problem we had yesterday. All right. I don't know why this freezes up, but it does. All right. Rounded corners and shadows on borders. This is just applying, some of it is applying what we'd already looked at. All right. There's something called border radius. And notice 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I'll do is I'll come back to here. And this, I think, has to be put in separately because it's a different, basically considered a different property. So let's look at this one and let's put in border radius 5 pixels. Now I'm going to run this, but watch the corners here, 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 and here when I do that. And you hopefully you can notice they're now rounded. All right, I can make them even more pronounced. I'll set it to 15, and now they're really rounded. Now, what a lot of developers like to do today is to customize, for example, their buttons. And this is a way that you can take buttons which are basically kind of rectangular by default. All right. And you can make them, give them maybe a nicer look. Now you can overblow this. So I could come in here and put it 50. Oh, not 305, 50 and run it. And you can see what's happening when we're doing that. All right. If I change that to 100, sooner or later, it's going to look pretty much circular. All right. So there's a lot of different things that you can do on this that you can do for effect. All right. As it says, when you code the border radius property, you can assign, basically a different value to each corner if you want to. You can also add a shadow, as it says, with a 5th value in there, 5. All right, so they put a box shadow on here, okay? And that's how much you want. So that's 3 pixels top. I believe this is the way it's set up, but this is the way that the shadow is set up. Let's try that one. All right, so we'll put a box shadow in there. We'll put all 5 up. I'll use the same ones they have, but a different color. In fact, let's do this. All right, and I'm going to get rid of that border radius. I'm just going to set it to 5 so it looks a little better. All right. So notice now, okay, there's the 3 pixels. There's the 4 pixels. There's the 5 pixels. All right, etc. And it's blue. So this stuff can all be done for effect. I will tell you, because this is a really important thing that you hear this. You never want to set it up that you just go nuts, because I've seen this on sites. They're beautiful. All right. The colors are beautiful, etc. But you never want to lose touch of the content of the site. All right. In other words, you don't want somebody to get off of your site and say, man, that was beautiful. I don't remember anything about what the site was about, but the colors are beautiful. That's not doing what you want it to do, especially if you're selling a service or something like that. All right. Background colors and images. You can set backgrounds. We've already looked at background colors, but you can also set an image. instead of a color. You can put an image back there. All right. You can tell that image if it's real little. I used to show this to people, but it was really ugly. I had a real little one of the smiley faces in there, and I set that up as a background image. And it must have been on there 100 or 200 times because it was real small. All right. You can tell it's repeat. And when you tell it to repeat, a repeat X means just repeat vertically. You can do a repeat Y, which says to repeat horizontally. All right. And as it says, background attachment, this is going to be basically help to be set up so that as you're moving the up and down the page, do you want that background image, if you're using one, to move or not move? Same thing with the position. Do you want it? Typically, you're going to use center in here, but you don't have to. Now, it says as an accessibility guideline, don't use a background color or image that makes the text that it goes over difficult to read. All right. And again, I've seen plenty of examples of that. Okay. So this says we want the background to be blue, but as much as you can, go out to images, find this texture.gif. And if for some reason it doesn't, it can't find it, or for some reason it's not, the image does not cover the whole page, cover the rest of the page in blue. All right. So there's examples of all these in here. Okay. And you will get a chance when you're doing the homework and when you're doing the labs to work on these. Gradients is basically changing a color. There is an example. Now that's typically, I don't think that's a gradient really, but typically you go from one color and it's a morphing, for lack of better words. And when you morph, you can morph directly, like from white to red, or you can morph from red to blue and you can put a color in between it, etc. All right. You can morph um, diagonally. You can morph basically horizontally. You can morph vertically. There's a lot of ways that you can do this. And as it says there, it takes different parameters. The first one, as it says, it works with degrees. All right. Sometimes what's going to happen is, wow, that looks really cool. You go out to a website and you might take a look at it. Oh, that's how they set that up. All right. And you, for lack of better words, you copy it. You might use different colors or whatever. All right. So then they come in here and they show this web page that uses both borders and backgrounds. So again, you can see where they've added the circular. All right. You can see the shadow that they put in there. And it's not that easy to see, but there is a gradient behind it. And again, as always, they have the CSS for it. And that CSS is shown right here. That's really and truly not going to make a boatload of sense until you go through it. So as it says here, because we're going to take a break, we've now completed chapter 5. All right. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about the box model. We talked about margin. We talked about padding. We talked about borders. And we ended up talking about backgrounds. All right. Now, in the next chapter, which we're going to go get through in just a couple minutes or go through, they're going to talk about kind of putting together what we've done so far. In other words, they're going to give you a bunch of different layouts and show you how to set those up. All right. Let's come back, please, at 9:10. All right. I'm going to give myself a new water, and I will see you then.
And
All right, it is 9:11. I think we said till 9:10. Hopefully you're all back. I'm starting up on chapter 6, which begins on page 175 in the book. Now, I'm not going to concentrate so much on how to develop a 2 and 3 column page layout, etc., like they talk about in here. We will look at them. To me, the most important parts of this chapter are floating and clearing elements and using positioning with elements. All right, so that's what I'm going to concentrate on in here. We will talk about everything that's in here. So the first thing is a 2 or a 3 column layout. And when you look in here, let's see, there's a 2 column layout. And if you notice where it says the luncheon starts in 15 minutes after the lecture ends, two things about that. First of all, you can see it has a box around it. That probably makes sense. All right. That's called an aside. And when you look up here on the CSS, you can see that it has been floated to the right. All right. And then other text, and you want to float around it. Now, quite often, and I was going to check on here and I forgot to during the break. So let me look quick here. Um, that when you use the float property, I don't know if they're going to really show it. There you go. A lot of times you use it so that you can float text like this. So you can float text around an image. And you'll notice the image here says float right. I'm going to change it from float right to float left and run it again. And hopefully, I mean, you can see the difference. All right. Now, from what we learned in the last chapter, okay, we could come in because this looks pretty ugly right here. All right. So we could come in and as an example, all right, we could say margin right 10 pixels. All right, and run it again. And you see we pushed it over a little bit now. So and maybe that's not even enough. Maybe we want 25 pixels. All right, to really push that away. But the idea, what I'm trying to get across to you here is what we're doing when we're floating. And what we're doing is we're saying we want this to be on the left and everything else to kind of float around it. All right, and again, if I change this back to right, it's probably going to look a little bit funky. All right, because where I actually want that, I don't want a margin right now. I would want a margin left. So there's all sorts of different things that you can do, all right, to sit there and float things, but the majority of what you're going to do will be to try to make text, either text float around text or text to float around images. All right. And like I said, this is kind of become my go-to is to go to W3 schools because I think they do a good job of explaining most everything. So it says when you float an element to the right or the left, the content that follows flows around it. All right. It says when you use the float property for an element, you also need to set. All right. Like they show here. To stop floating, you use the clear property. So you'll notice with the example they have here, all right, it says footer clear both. All right, if you didn't have that, since we're floating right here, I would think that it would take this line that we've got here, please call today at 559, etc., and it would float it off to the right. So when you float, all right, you float right or you float left. And when you can clear right, you can clear left, or you can clear anything that's set by saying clear both. All right. And again, in my opinion, for whatever this is or is not worth, it's not going to make any sense until you actually sit there and start working on some of the assignments. And you know what? There's probably a good chance that when you start and you put in your first one, it's not going to look the way you want it to look. And that's okay. All right. It's totally fine. That's how you learn, for lack of better words. All right. So the first thing they're going to talk about, it says how to use floating in a two-column fixed layout. And again, kind of a neat example here, believe it or not, because what they're showing you here is a lot of stuff. There are two columns. The columns mean that you put the main stuff, as you can see in the left column, you put the aside stuff on the right column. And you'll notice the header and the footer do not have a column or format. In other words, they take up the entire size. Also, what they show behind it here in kind of a almond or an orangish color, that could be an image, that could be a background color, that could be whatever you wanted it to be. But the point is, what they're showing here is it's a two-column page width, and notice the key word here is fixed width columns. The reason I'm telling you that, and the reason I'm saying that's the key, is even if this has got a ton of information in it, and this has got nothing, or this has got basically nothing, and this has got a ton of information, since they're fixed width, they're always going to hold that size. All right. So they're showing it in here is this is the actual body. This is it. So where it says header, that's there. Where it says main, that's there. Or main content, I should say, aside there. That's it. But then they set up the CSS. Again, I can't tell you this too much. I've had people in past years who have talked to me and said, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I've told them, go back and look at the examples that are in the book, bring them up because you've got the code, and make changes to them. A lot of times make dramatic changes to them to see what happens. Now you'll notice here they say the width of the body is 962 pixels. Where do they get that from? All right. Well, they've got 600 here and 350. That's 950, but the aside is 360. So 600 and 360 is 960. Plus, they said over here someplace there was padding. All right. That was 2. Okay. Now it says the main element is floated to the left and the aside is floated to the right. So it doesn't matter, as it says, whether the aside comes before or after the main element. What does that mean? Well, this right here, this is the CSS. This is the actual HTML that's in here. All right. So there's, as it says, there's an alternative. There's different ways that you can do this. All right. Now, that was a fixed column layout. The next one they're going to show here is a fluid layout. And notice what it says. You can create a fluid layout with this. The width of the page changes as the user changes the width of the browser window. As it says here, also the width of one or more columns within the page changes. Now, when you're doing what we just looked at, when you're doing fixed stuff, you're virtually always going to be using pixels, as is shown right here, because pixels are a fixed unit of measure. When you use fluid layout, almost always you're going to be using percentages. So this says we want the body to take up 90%. So in other words, the 90% means there's 5% here and 5% there. All right. And then main is going to take up, this will take up 2/3 of that 90%. And then this will take up 1/3. And you'll notice that between them, if you add them, 66 and 33 is 99. So what should happen is there should be a little gap that's right here. But this should change. So if I take my screen size and make it smaller, this should still always occupy 66% of it, 33% of it. But when we looked at the other one just a minute ago, this is an absolute measurement. So when you make this smaller, eventually probably all you're going to see is part of the main content. It's not going to change. Typically, what you want to shoot for when you're designing anything web is, again, to use relative measurements, to use M's and REMs, and to use percentages. And a lot of times you don't know. I mean, well, this didn't look that great. So you play with it. And that's pretty much what they're doing in here. And not only that, you'll notice in here with the aside, it says here in this example, they are using, so the aside is fixed, right? So you can combine these, is what I'm saying. It says the benefit of using fluid column widths is that the width of the page is adjusted based on the width of the browser. You'll typically get a lot nicer look and feel. Now that was 2 columns, and now they're going to do it with 3. All right. What they call sidebars, they're basically just asides. Okay. And before you say, but nobody'd ever do that, I will tell you that today, most of the time, what you see on most sites is up on the top here. You might have a logo right there, and then you've got a menu up here where you can jump back and forth. But what was in vogue for many years, and some sites still employ this, is up here, this was just a header. There was no menu stuff. Rather, the menu stuff was over here. Some sites still do employ that today. All right. It's like the old joke about somebody who's going to throw out their tie, TIE, and then they say, "Why are you throwing it out?" Because it's too skinny. It's not in style anymore. And then the person says, "Well, give it a few years and it'll come back in style." All right. And that pretty much is the truth. There's nothing to say that, many sites still use this today. And that's not to say that that couldn't become more and more popular as time goes on. All right. So again, they show you the CSS. And again, since this was fixed, they are using pixels. All right. As it says, the first aside is floated to the left. Now, then notice the main content is floated to the left and the aside is floated to the right. All right. So what this says is hug as much to the left as you can. Whatever's left, hug as much left as you can. Well, it can't go all the way because we've got that. And hug this as much to the right as you can. So what I'm saying is it's an example of using both float left and float right. All right. Now, the reason that many over time using floats has very much lost its luster, so to speak, because it's just hard. People forget to turn off floating. They do floating, but it doesn't really look the way they want it to look, etc. So what we're going to get into when we get into chapters 9 and 10 is when we talk about CSS grid and we talk about Flexbox, it removes the need to do any floating. So a natural question then is, fine, then why are we learning it? Because there's still millions of sites out there that are legacy sites that have been out there for years that people aren't going to change them because they work. All right. Just because you've got now Flexbox and Grid, et cetera, and other things you can use, that doesn't mean people are going to use them. All right. So this is a home page, as it says, with a 2-column fixed width layout. Okay. So when you look in here, let's again look at a couple things. You can see there literally are 2 columns. The lecture notes stuff is loaded to the right, probably, and you can see it's got a different color, etc. on it, and everything else, okay, is a column. There's again many ways that you can set this up. There are 2 examples in this chapter, and I think that's the one that we're looking at now. And the other one that we'll see later is this one. So you've got your choice. I mean, literally, I always tell people, it's like, I've given this example before. I don't know if I have for you guys or not, but it's like, you go in and you're taking a class, an art class, and you walk into the class, the first day, and there's nobody there. But what is there? Oh, we'll grab that one. Is this. All right. There's just a bowl of fruit and there's a sign that is up, not a sign, but there is something on the whiteboard behind it that says, I'll be a little late. Please draw this bowl of fruit. Now, some people might take it literally and they might draw it looking exactly like it does. To other people, maybe something stands out. In other words, it's some people might look at it and see this, some people might look at it and see almost this, etc. And that's pretty much what ends up happening when you're developing a website. And what I'm saying here is, the way that you set it up, ideally, it's not going to be the same for everybody. And what you'll find, because I've had to do this, is that when you work for people, all right, if you're contracting out, for example, you ask them what they want. The funny thing is, a lot of times when you say to somebody, what do you want? They're, oh, geez, I don't know. So you give them something. And if it's not what they want, then they really quickly know what they don't want. All right. And again, I've gone through this kind of thing before. So, if you're working for a company where you are contracted out and you're doing a site for somebody else, or you're your own contractor, you want to make sure that whoever you're creating something for, you keep them as involved in the process as possible. So you're not constantly doing a lot of rework. As it says in here, this web page illustrates a common page layout with a header, two columns, and a footer. All right. It says the columns are coded as a section element and an aside within main. There's different ways, as I've already mentioned to you, that you can do this. All right. So they show you the HTML for the home page. All right. And then they'll show you the CSS for the home page. Again, the stuff typically that's new or newer in here, they're going to colorize it. This is the last one right here. So that'll be this one right here, this speakers page. All right. And as it says, it is a 2-page fixed width layout. All right. And it includes, again, it'll show you the CSS and it'll show you the HTML. And I'm purposely not spending a lot of time on this because you will be doing a lot of this work or this type of work when you are doing the homework and the labs for this. And we'll look at that in just a bit. All right. So again, they'll give you the HTML, but they'll say it pretty much is the same as what we looked at before and the CSS, but again, they'll show you the changes. All right. And there aren't a boatload of them. All right. How to create text columns. It says so far we've been talking about the columns, but it says CSS provides a nice feature that makes it easy to create text columns. Well, they've got something called column count. And literally, it will take whatever you're working on and it'll break it up into that many columns. What do you mean, Jeff? Well, take a look right here. All right. And you'll notice this is one column, but we could have taken the text that's in there and used column count, for example, and made it 2 columns or more if we wanted to do that. This again goes back kind of to the days of newspapers where you would see a page on a newspaper that would typically be multi-columned. All right. Not only can you set up the number of columns, but as it says there, you can set up a gap. All right. That's as it says, the width between columns. Usually it's typically referred to as the amount of white space between columns. And as it says, if you don't set it up, it'll be set by default. That's another thing that can look different on different browsers. All right. Then it says rules, as it says, defines a border between columns rather than just a gap or some white space. All right. And then we've got column span. As it says, the number of columns that a child element within an article should span. The default is 1. So for example, you might have a picture that's really big. do you want that to be able to span multiple columns, is what they're saying, as an example. All right, so here's an example where when you look in here, the column count has been set to 3. And it's pretty obvious to see what it is. Now, one thing about this, and this is going to make much more sense what I'm about to tell you when we get into chapters 8, 9, and 10, that this might look fine on a laptop, on a desktop, maybe even on a tablet, but this isn't going to work on a phone. So what you're typically going to want to do is, if you're looking at this on a phone, you'll want to reset the column count down to 1. All right. Another example, a 2-column web page with a 2-column article. There's the 2 columns here and here. All right. All right. Now, believe it or not, we've finished the majority of this page. I am going to go on to this next section, but again, I'm going to jump back out and I'm going to jump into W3 schools, or try to. I might have removed it. No, I didn't. I guess I did. I want to talk about the position property. Okay. Now, what's nice about this is, again, I believe in either trying to show you examples or at least show you where you can see your own examples. Now, you'll notice here, this is a position property and it says absolute. So when I click right there, there it is. Okay. And it says this is a heading with absolute position. So we have placed it where we want it to be on a page. What does that mean? All right. Well, this H2 left 100, top 150, what it means, this area that's right here at the top, right there, that is position 0, 0. So for me to say left 100 pixels, that means I want you to move that way 100 pixels. And I want you, the top is 150. So from here to here is 150. And you'll notice if I come in, for example, and let's double this. So 200 and 300 might even be off the page. All right. It's doing what it can do based on the values that I'm putting in here. And if I do come in and put in here, because you can do this. Notice I'm going to come in here and I don't remember even what it was. I guess it was 100 and it was 150. So this is what it said to begin with. All right. That's what it looked like. But you actually can come in here and put in negative values. And you say, well, where is it? It's off the page, because what I told it to do was to go 100 off to the left. And for the top, I said basically minus 150. All right. And again, before you say, well, that's stupid. No, it's not. Because as you'll learn later, when we talk about transitions and moving stuff around, sometimes maybe you've seen a site like this where you bring up a site and something is not showing, but it kind of comes onto the screen and it moves its way over. This is a way that you can start to do that. All right, I'm going to try to change that to a 10 and a 15 and see if we can see anything then. There it is. Okay. And you notice it goes right over the top. It's absolutely positioned. It's going where we tell it to go. All right. So if I go in here and put in here 0 and 0 and click run, well, that looks pretty ugly, but it went where we told it to go. Now, when you look at this, you might say, well, that's not 0. It's not up on the top here. That looks pretty much, it's again, what the browser set in there. Okay. I might be able to do this. Let's see if I go in and say body, and we'll say padding 0, margin 0. When you use 0 like that, I wanted to mention that to you. You don't have to say pixels or anything else. You can, like they do it here, but you can just say 0 because 0 is 0. Now when I do this, okay, it did move it over, so there's something that's still set in there. It moved this stuff over, but it didn't really move this over much. All right. So why am I taking the time to tell you this? It's because when we look in here, all right, these are the things that we care about. All right. You can have static positioning, and that's the way that things are by default. They go from right to left as long as there's room, and top to bottom. That's static in this country. Now, in other countries, they might, instead of going left to right, they might go right to left. All right. You just saw absolute. All right. Fixed means, as it says, position relative to the browser window, relative, and sticky. And sticky is the one I tend to have the most problem with. Now, you'll notice here that where it says play it, there are demos for each one of these. All right. I have not looked at this, so I have no idea what this says. And I'm looking here, and it's not showing me much of anything, so I'm not going to waste your time. But the sticky one, this one says try it. Notice here it says I am sticky. See that? How it's not moving? It does move, but it says when you get to the top, okay? So sometimes what you find what people will do with sticky, as an example, is they will take their nav bar and make it sticky so that it stays on top all the time. Or their footer, and they may make it sticky and stick it to the bottom type of thing. We're going to see examples of all of that stuff. All right. I should mention too, just so you see this, because this is something I have not mentioned to you this semester. Now, I've already said to you that we're using CSS3, which is the newest version of CSS, even though it's going on 25 years old almost. All right. Some of the stuff, some of the features and functionality that has been put into there, some browsers might still not be using. What does that mean? Well, there's a really neat website, and it's simple. I don't have to write it down for you, but it's called caniuse.com. Can I use one word, CANIUSE.com. Bring that up. Kind of ugly, but I want to say in here sticky. So I type that in, and this is what it shows me. It shows me browser support. Green is good, red is bad. All right. So what green means is it's supported in those versions. So for example, in Chrome, if you're using version 91 and above, sticky is totally supported. If you're using versions 56 to 90, there's partial support. And if you're using anything less than 56, it's not supported. Now you might say, well, geez, everybody's got the newest version of a browser. Not true at all. All right. Years ago, I visited my brother. He lives way up in northern Wisconsin. And I was actually at a conference that was an hour from his house. So I drove over to his house, and he was showing me something on his computer. And I realized, when he was going out to websites and stuff, it was unbelievably slow. And I said, can I ask you what version of internet? This was many, many years ago. It was Internet Explorer. I said, what version of IE are you using? And he said, whatever came with a machine. And I said, how old's the machine? He said, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years old. And the newest version then I think was like IE8. And he had IE2 on his machine. All right. And the reason I'm telling you that is, you've got to account for stuff like that. All right. And going along with that, get rid of that, with some of the stuff that we've looked at in here. All right. What you're going to see. So again, it's caniuse.com. All right. But as you go in and you start looking at some of this stuff, I wanted to show you the example that they showed, but I guess I probably have removed it. Sometimes we might have to add different things onto here. And if you say, I don't know what you mean, just take my word for it that we're not done with this yet. How's that? So they show position static. Again, that's the default. They're not affected by setting top, bottom, left and right properties, an element with static position is not positioned in a special way. It just follows naturally what should happen. All right. Then there's relative position. And as it says, it's positioned relative to where you'd normally want it to be. So when we look at that, all right, there's the relative. And again, how can you tell? That's fine. How can I tell what that means? Well, I could always come in here and don't know if it wants it like this or the other way. So let's do it both ways. Doesn't want it that way. So now I've taken the under the style, I've removed the relative positioning, and you can see what happened. It doesn't look like much, but all we told it to do was to go left, which means push it to the right. So in other words, make a 30 pixel left right there and add a border. All right. This is another one of those things that, in my opinion, this is why I started showing it to people like this, is it's not going to make a lot of sense until you start going through here and running the different examples. All right. Here's fixed. And as it says, okay, this is literally fixed. The element with position fixed is position relative to the viewport. Means it always stays in the same place, even when the page is scrolled. All right. So as an example, you might want to set up your site so down at the bottom, you've got some kind of a legal thing. I'm not talking here about it might be or it might not be a footer. All right, but something that you want to not move at all on a page. Now, what happens today, and used to happen a lot more, is what companies would do is they would put a watermark on their documents. And if you don't know what that means, I can kind of show you here. This, where is it? The chapters 1 to 3 that I got sent that I gave to all of you. All right. And when I start going through here, hopefully you can see that at the bottom. It says Rankin College, Rankin Technical College, AWD. Well, this is just static. It's not moving, but that's a watermark, basically. See that? And that's on every page. All right. And what that is if somebody would steal it and try to print it or use it or whatever, it'd be very hard for them to get that off. All right. But many documents, what companies used to do is they'd have white documents like this with black text, and then they'd have an image that would take up the whole page that would be a watermark, or maybe some pages would have that watermark, and they would make it fixed. So as you keep going like this, that watermark would not leave. All right. There's absolute, and a lot of these sound really similar to one another, but it says it's position relative to the nearest position ancestor. However, if an absolute position has no ancestor, it uses the body and it moves along with the page as you scroll. So again, there's another example here, okay? And there's not really any scrolling that's going to take place in here. But again, as I've said to you several times already today, the only way that this stuff that's in here, and they're sticky, is going to make sense, all right, is by trying it, all right? And there, that can become important. Positioning text over an image, all right? I mean, they've really muted the image, but you get the example, hopefully you get the idea where you want to position that. And again, they've got examples here that'll show each one of these, and there's even more stuff that's in here. All right, so there's more that you can do with positioning properties. All right, so if I go to position, that's where we just were. Okay. All right. So as it says, the chapter ends by presenting several positioning techniques. That's what I tried showing you there. It says that you may never need. All right. Or you may need them a lot. It depends on what it is, what the site is about, how you're trying to present it. or how whoever you're creating it for, how they want it presented. And what's going to happen is if you do this, if you end up doing this for a living, and either you are a contractor or you work for a company that contracts out work, there will come a time when you go to do some work for somebody and they'll tell you what you want, and you're thinking in the back of your head, that is really stupid. All right. And a couple things about this. I used to look at that and I'd want to say to them, you really don't want that. But then I thought, well, you're going to find out yourself that you really don't want that. So that means that you're going to have more work for me. So you're going to bring me back. So that's one thing. The other thing is if somebody sits there and gives you a list of requirements and they say, hey, we want you to do this. We want you to create this website and have these 7 things on it. And you totally understand it. And you think to yourself, well, they probably want these 3 things. I wouldn't go to the trouble of asking them that. Because if you ask somebody, hey, we're contracted for these 7 things. Do you want these 3 as well? They're almost always going to say yes, but they're not going to pay you anymore to do that. And that's just life. That's just the way stuff works, usually. All right. So the 4 ways to position, as it says, okay, it says to position elements on a page, you use the property shown. The position property determines the positioning that you'll use. It can have the 4 values that are shown here: static, absolute, fixed, and relative. You've seen all those, plus you've seen sticky. All right, and there are examples of each one of these in here. All right, again, static, as it says, the element is placed in the normal flow, which is the default. Absolute, it's removed from the flow and positioned relative to the closest containing block. Fixed, as it says, positioned absolutely, and relative, all right, positioned relative to its position in the flow. Now, there's one more thing that's discussed in here that they mention right here, and that is z-index. Okay, if you have a web page, and let's assume for a second that you've got a web page, and that web page has on it, and maybe you don't know exactly what you're doing, but you've got an image, and you've got another image, and then you've got some text, and you end up basically putting them all in the same place. So you've got an image, then another image, all right, etc. Well, what's going to happen is one of those things will be in the foreground and the other 2 will be in the background. All right. When you use z-index, you give whatever it is you're working with, be it an image or be it text or whatever, you give it a number. The higher the number you put in there, the more it comes to the foreground. The lower the number, the more it gets pushed to the background. So if I had 3 things and I gave them a z-index of 1, 2, and 3, the one with the 3 would be in the foreground. The one with the 1 would be in the background. All right. And again, that is not probably going to make a lot of sense until you see it in action. So they give you an absolute positioning example here. Okay. Again, notice when you use it, the remaining elements are positioned as if the element wasn't there. As a result, you may need to make room. So you might be able to set this up, for example, that this stays no matter where you are, no matter how you scroll up and down on the screen. What that means is you don't want to put anything over here where it's going to overwrite it or it'll look terrible. All right, now that's it. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I very quickly wanted to show you. Give me a second here. Now, what we've done in here so far for the startup was this. This is what we've got. We did that as a class. So let's look at what you're going to be doing next. All right. right. Well, just taking a look, you can see a few things here, such as, well, we've added some color here and it looks like some shadow. All right. Looks like we've changed the color of these links. Okay. Looks like we've centered this. So you are going to have the chance to utilize what has been discussed. And this was actually from chapter 4. So when we get to chapter 5, now what's new? Well, looks like there's a gradient here now. All right. And looks like this whole thing is inside of some kind of a wrapper, and there is some shadow that's here and a little bit here and down there. There's colorization here, and there's a gradient here. All right. In just a moment, we're going to go over chapter. We went over 6, so now they're making it a columnar format. All right. So this is the stuff we just looked at. And they'll want you to do both a 2-column format and they'll want you to do a 3-column format. All right. And in just a minute, we're going to go into chapter 7. Well, now we're making it look, this may not look nice to you, but what are we doing here? Well, we're taking our navigation and we're making it look more, whatever you want to call it, professional or whatever. Plus, this is a 2-level menu. So if you go to stress related, all right, it's going to come down and it's going to show you those examples. All right. And of course, then on the other one, so we've got the shape and we've got the Halloween, which is in here someplace. I'm not going to bring that up other than to say that, on there, you're going to be doing similar stuff. So when we get, so there's 4, a little bit of work with color. There's 5. Notice the background with the bats on it. And we put that in there as a wrapper. 6. All right. And you can see, hopefully, as we're coming through here, this is looking a lot more professional. It's looking like a quote, real website, unquote. All right. This might be the kind of thing that at the end of the semester, you're going to want to go in and put a link to this on your electronic portfolio. And again, we're not even talking portfolio right now, not on day 6 or 7 or whatever we're in. All right. Okay, so what I'll do right now is I'm going to go on and I'm going to jump into the next chapter, but I'll only go till about 10 o'clock for about 7 minutes. We'll take one last break, and then when we come back, we'll finish up by 11 o'clock today. All right? All right. So chapter 7, as you can see, is how to work with lists, how to work with links, how to work with navigation menus. All right. When you are working with ordered and unordered lists, the way that you set them up is virtually the same. The only thing that's different in a quote typical ordered list and a quote typical unordered list is an unordered list will have a UL beginning and ending tag, and an ordered list will have an OL beginning and ending tag. So we'll talk about those. You can nest them. In other words, you can have an ordered list in an ordered list, or an ordered list in an unordered list, or any combination thereof. All right. So we'll look at that first. Then we'll look at how to do some formatting in here. All right. Changing the bullets. I think I mentioned this to you before that by default, there's 3 different things that you can set up for the bullets in an ordered list. You can have the circle that's colored in. That's the default. That's called a disk. The circle itself is a circle that's not colored in. You can have a square, or you can set up a URL and you can put your own thing in there, whatever you want. All right. And for the ordered list, again, you can change the numbering. By default, it's 1, 2, 3, so it's decimal. You can have it be decimal. You can have it be letters, capital or lowercase, A, B, C, D. You can have it be Roman numerals. capital or lowercase, etc. So we'll look at that first, and then we'll come in and talk about links. Now, a lot of this will be very simple to you, but one thing that you may or may not have seen is how to basically link, all right, to, going from one part of a page to another part of the same page. So I'll show you that. All right. The email and the phone links, we did have mail to, I believe, on the test. Finally, again, we will end up talking about these navigation menus. So let's get into it. Again, I'll go for about 3 or 4 minutes, more minutes, then we'll take a break. Why this gets stuck, I really wish I knew, but it does. So let's see if I can get this one. Will that move? No. Okay. All right. So how to code lists. Again, an unordered list, you have a UL, the tag is UL, which stands for unordered list. Unordered lists are filled with list items. You literally can put almost anything in there. All right. Almost always what you're going to see inside of an LI will be one of two things, either straight text or a hyperlink. All right. I suppose you could even have a combination, but that's typically what you're going to see in there. So when you set this up, since we didn't put anything, there's no CSS that is being shown. That again is the disk. So it's a colored in circle. All right. If you want to change that, as mentioned with CSS, you can go in and we'll look at that in just a bit. Okay. So with an ordered list, again, it's an OL for ordered list, and it's again the LIs. Now this is kind of interesting. So notice here what they're doing. All right. So what they have in here is an ordered list. That's the beginning of the ordered list. There's the end. Now they're making another ordered list, but they want it to look continuous. So you can say start equals. Why did they say start equal 4? Because we had 1, 2, 3 items. So this will become item 4, 5, and 6, as you can see. All right. And we're going to get to in just a little bit how you can go in and you can change them from numbers to letters or whatever you want. All right. This is a nested list. It kind of looks like an outline, for lack of better words, when you look at it right there. And you can set that up again any way you want. There is no limit to the amount of nesting that you can do inside of these ordered or unordered lists. There literally is no limit. All right. All right. There's also something that's called a description list. And that's probably the most confusing one. All right. Instead of using um, an OL tag, or instead of using a UL tag, you use a DL tag, which is description list. And what goes in there are DTs, which is a term, and DDs, which is the description. That's a little confusing. So notice it's kind of like you might use it with a glossary. That's the term, and that's the definition of the term, and it ends up looking like this. There's other ways you can do that. You don't have to use one of these. I will tell you that I very rarely, if ever, have used one of these, except if I have within, you're asked to do that inside of an exercise in a book like this. All right. So before we go into formatting, it is 10 o'clock. Let's take 10 minutes and let's come back at 10 after 10. And again, we'll be done by 11 today, if not earlier. All right. I'll see you in 10 minutes. All right, let's start back up then. Was here and here. All right, so we left off on how to format lists. And the first thing, as you can see here, that's discussed. So this will all be CSS, and that's how to change the bullets for an unordered list. And again, there are actually 5 ways of doing it. All right, you use the list style, and if you say list style disk, that's the solid circle, so that's the default. You don't have to say it. If you say list style circle, that's what they call a hollow circle, or in other words, it's a black circle that is hollowed out in the inside, so it's white on the inside. Square is a solid square. None means none whatsoever. And you can also put in your own image right there. So that would be a list style image. And when you do that, you set it up like this, right there. List style image, and you give it a URL. So when you look at the examples, there is the circle. Again, you can see it's a circle and it's hollowed out in the middle. And here they have added their own. All right. So if you remember, last week we created that simple website. I probably still have it out here someplace that had the chocolate chip cookie recipe, etc. And for the ingredients, I said they really didn't matter as far as the order. So we really could go and find ourselves a real little picture or shrink it down of a chocolate chip cookie. And we could take the, basically, we could use our list style and we could use something like they do there with the star and make them so they were each a little cookie if we wanted to do that. So again, it is list style, and the type is either disk, circle, square, or none. And if you use an image, it's URL, and then you've got to give it the path to the image. All right, the numbering system for an ordered list, pretty simple. That's what you've got. Decimal, notice you can have a leading 0 if you want on there. Alpha lowercase, alpha uppercase, Roman numeral rather lowercase, or Roman numeral uppercase. Okay. The key thing though is, consistency as far as you have the way that you have something look. If you decide that you want to do this in here, you've got ABCs, etc. You probably want to do that throughout, if not on all pages, at least on most pages. But again, what you see in here is it's again list style type, exactly what we saw before. But as opposed to saying list style type circle or list style type square, it's now list style type one of these. Okay. All right. Changing the alignment of list items. One thing to realize when you are working on list items. All right. Just like everything else that you might have on your page, the browser by default will put a certain amount of margin and or padding. All right. When you basically set up your list, whether it's an ordered list, an unordered list, or one of those definition lists. Okay. So you can turn off everything again at the beginning. No margin, no padding for this. All right. And notice we set it both no margin and no padding, both for the list itself and for the items on the list. Then we go back in and we add some. All right. So as mentioned here, you can use margins and padding to control that. All right. You can remove the indentation. Okay. Now it says this doesn't work as well for ordered lists because the numbers or letters are aligned to the right. When you work with ordered lists, you typically don't do a lot of formatting because it can be very simple, very easy to get it looking pretty bad. All right. As it says, these techniques work best if you use the padding and margins using M's. Rems would work as well, but what they're talking about here is a relative unit of measure, not pixels, not points. Really, percentages wouldn't make a lot of sense in here either, to be honest with you. All right, coding links. As it says in chapter 1, we learn how to code a simple link. Here's how we go to another page. All right, all the stuff that's in here, we have talked about href already. We have not talked about title. We have not talked about tab index. We have not talked about access key. href is an acronym for hypertext reference, and what you put in there is the page that you want the link to go to. All right, if you put in a title, as it says, the description is displayed as a tooltip. So if you put your mouse over it, you get the little hand and then whatever you want to put in here. Okay. So for instance, in here, where it says review the complete table of contents, that's this right here. That's the title. All right. When you work with a tab index, many people, especially if you're an older person like me, but especially if you're an older person, many people are used to going from field to field on a page by hitting their tab key. All right, as opposed to using their mouse or whatever. Sometimes people just do that just to see what happens if they hit the tab key. You can set a tab index. Those of you who are in the AWD 1100 C# programming class last semester, we worked with tab indexes a lot because as we built our graphical user interface, when you wanted to move from control to control, you set the tab index up accordingly. And you can do the same thing in here. Again, that'll become even more important later. I don't know what chapter it is, around chapter 11 or so, when we talk about forms. Finally, you can have an access key, and that's a shortcut. All right. Now, it's changed a lot over time, but just to show you this, okay, file, and you go down and it's exit. Well, it used to be, and I don't know if it still is or not. I don't really want to check it right now. I can. But if you did an Alt X here, so if I hold down on the Alt key and I tap the letter X, looks like nothing happened. All right. But that used to be another way of doing file and then exit. So what you'd see on here with some of these keys would have an underline by a letter, which would mean they would have a shortcut. You could do Alt plus that letter, all right, to make an action happen. That's using an access key. And again, there's examples of most of these here. Look at the accessibility guidelines again. These become more and more important, as I mentioned to you earlier, especially if you end up working for a company that either is a government entity or that really interfaces with the public. You know, if you're selling a service, not to be funny or cruel or anything, but if I'm selling a service or a product, I don't particularly care if the person is blind or deaf or something else. As long as they've got the money to pay for the service, that's what I'm concerned with as being somebody who works for that company. All right. But it says here, if the text for a link has to be short, code the title attribute to clarify where the link is going. All right. So again, this is typically, you know, notice how the text there is short and the title is a lot longer. I have never used one of these, but you know, again, except when you're talking about using something for accessibility purposes. You should also code the title attribute if a link includes an image, but it has no text, because again, if somebody is visually impaired, they're not going to be able to see the image anyway. But if they put their mouse over it, all right, or if they're, you know, they're using their speech recognition, etc., and they put their mouse over an image, then the title, for instance, if they did that here, it would say something like review the complete table of contents type of an idea. All right, so as they mentioned in the description, you use an A element, that's anchor, to create a link, goes to another page. All right. It says the tab order is the sequence of links to be tabbed to. That's not that important. And what a access key is. All right. Formatting links. This is a little different, for lack of better words. We looked at this a little bit the other day, but we're going to talk about it again. All right. Notice as it says, they all start with a colon. So colon link is a link that you have not yet clicked, so it's blue by default. Colon visited is a link you have clicked, so it's purple by default. Hover is when you take your mouse and put it over a link. Focus, basically, as it says, an element like a link or whatever is active at the current time. All right. And active, as it says. The focus and active are very similar to one another. All right. There is a text decoration property that you can use with links, because sometimes what you want is you want the link to be a certain color, but you don't want it to be underlined. So you can say text decoration none. Text decoration, then you'd say colon none. All right. And there are some examples. So you'll notice here with this A link, the color is green. All right. The hover is green, etc. But here it says when you're hovering over it, make the font size 1.25 times its regular size. So there's a lot of things that you can do with this. All right. And I wanted to show you this. Let's see. There is a recommended order. To style links appropriately, put the link rule before other link rules. I think this is the order here. LVHA. So what I'm saying is in your CSS, you do the link, then the visited, then the hover, then the active. That's the order in which you put them in there, those pseudo classes. And the reason for that is if you don't put them in there in that order, it's possible something can be overwritten. All right, because of the way that they're all set up. All right. How to use a link to open a new browser window or tab. Well, let's go back to here. All right, and here's my index. And these had these divs. We're not even going to use those, but I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put in a paragraph. And oops, I'm going to put in some lorem text. So I'm going to put in here lorem. Let's make it 50. All right, and I'm going to do a view word wrap, so it looks a little nicer. So I've now got this. I'm going to make this. I'm going to put 5 of these in here. All right, and I'm going to save this, and I'm going to run it. So this is what it looks like right now. Don't worry, this is not really important. I just wanted to show you that. All right. So why did I want to show you that? Because let's say that we want to come in here and in this, let's say the second paragraph, I'm just making this up as I go along, right here, where it says lorem ipsum dolor sit. I want that to go to Rankin Technical College's website. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say href equals https://rankin.edu. All right. Whoops. All right. Then my ending A tag is going to go right before that comma. Right there. All right. So this should now be hyperlinked. It should be blue by default. Okay. And let's take a quick look. So I'm going to do a file, save. In fact, let's do this. We just looked at this before, just so you can see all of them. Okay. Back to here, and here, and here, and here. So it's link visited, hover, active. Okay. I'm going to bring those in there too, so you can see all of them. All righty. So I've got this. If I do look at this right now, I'm not going to click it yet, but if I open it with live server, there it is. All right. And it looks like I've already go onto that site, and that's why it's that color. So let's put in something else. It's not this. I've gone to Google. I'm going to CNN. Let's put in here HTTPS. I think this will be right, //si.com. That's Sports Illustrated. Okay. What I want is I want that one to appear as being blue. And it is. It's not purple like the other one was. All right. That's the first thing. But I want to come into styles here, and I don't need these divs because I'm not using them. All right. But I am going to put in this. So I'm going to put in :link, and these will be my A tag. So A : link, A : visited. If this isn't making sense, just bear with me for about 30 seconds. A : hover, and A : active, which I spelled wrong. So link, I'm going to make these all different colors. So I'm going to make this color. I don't know if it's bad. I think it's color pink. All right. For visited, I think I'm doing this right. And if I'm not, you're going to know right when I know. All right. So visited, I'm going to make this color orange. For hover, I'm going to make this color, let's say black. Doesn't matter. I'm just making all this up anyway. And active, let's make this color purple. Blue. There. All right. So I now have that. So we'll see right now, right away, whether or not it worked. Is that pink? Yes, it is. All right. Remember what pink was. Bring that up so you can quickly see it. Pink was link. So I've not clicked on it yet. I'm going to click on it. And once I do, it should turn orange. But before I do that, I'm going to hover over it to see if it turns black. And it does, because we had our hover was set to black. All right. And I think active means you've clicked on it, but you haven't let go yet. So let's see if that's the case. So if I click on this link, it is going to change color. But before, if I just click and hold, there it's blue. Once I let go, all right, it changed. And maybe that's not an active link. I don't know. I might have done it wrong. Let me just see it here. Let me go find something. I've gone to all these today, so here I'll try Udemy, and let's see if it has that. Come on. I'm going to try it like this: http www.si.com. So file save. Go back here again to where I was. Bring up live server. There it is. There it is. Hold down. It's blue. Let go. There it is. All right. So notice the color now in here when I bring it up again. So if I bring that up again in here, I'm actually trying to show you something. So if you bear with me for a second, if I go back again, it's now orange. All right. So I've shown you the whole spectrum of colors. It was originally, before I clicked on it at all, it was pink. Once I clicked on it, it was orange. When I hovered over it, it was black. And when I clicked on it, but did not yet let go, it was blue. All right. Now, one thing you may or may not have noticed, and this is considered very poor etiquette, and that is when I click on this, I'm going to close a bunch of these because I got a ton of stuff open here. So I'm just going to close a bunch of these. All right. I've closed everything other than a couple things. So right here, don't need that anymore. All right. Now, when I do come up in here and I open this, All right. When I open this, I want you to notice what happens. There's my tab right here. All right. When I click on here and I want to go out to sportsillustrated.com, but watch what happens. It replaces the tab with a new tab. In other words, it's not opening this up in a new tab, is what I'm saying. It's not doing that. All right. If I want that to happen, then I have to change what's called the target element. So I'm going to come in here and say target equals underscore underscore blank. Means open it up in a blank new window. Now notice file save. If I again come into here, okay, and again, I'm right here. So let me refresh. Okay. Now notice it's got right here CSS box model right there. And when I click, it opened it up in a new tab. I still have my CSS box model. That's considered the right way of doing things. Why? Because to the unsuspecting user, they might not even know, because they're not going to see my HTML, and they're like, "Wow, Sports Illustrated is part of this website." No, it's a different site. All right. There's all actually it's internet etiquette that's called typically netiquette. All right, is what I just mentioned to you. All righty. So that was the target equal underscore blank. Okay. Now, how to create link to placeholders. My guess is everybody at one time or another has seen this. I'm gonna put something at the bottom of my page here. I'm gonna go down to the very bottom, and I'm gonna put here. I'm gonna put in an href, a href equals, and I'm gonna put something that'll look a little weird for a second. It's gonna say, I think I'm doing this right. We'll find out. Pound top, and I'm gonna put the word top right here. And I'm gonna put this into a paragraph, and it's going to say go to, and I want it to go to the top of the page. I'll have to do something else first. All right, but I want you to see this. So now at the very bottom of my page, the very bottom, it should be saying is way down here now. There's go to top. But notice if I click it, it actually went to the top, which surprises me, but it was more lucky than anything else. All right. But I want to be here and I want it to jump to here. How do I do that? Well, then what I do is at the top here, at the very top. In fact, let's put an H1 here at the top. H1, and we're going to say here top of the page. All right. And I'm going to do a file, save all, and I'm going to go back and try to run this again or look at it again. And I will refresh, go down to the bottom, click this. And if I click it enough, it looks like I'm moving, but if I just clicked it once, it didn't move anyplace. I want it to go literally to the top of the page. So how can I do that? I come up here and I say ID equal top. All right, so what did I do? I set an ID of top. That ID of top is the same one I used here. But I'm telling it with a pound sign, it's staying on the same page I'm on, and it's going to top. All right. In fact, just to be sure, I'm going to put a few more paragraphs in here. So this is really long. So I put 4 or 5 more paragraphs in there. Save, and I'm again going to jump here so you can see how long this is now. And when I click go to top, there I am. Well, let's see if we can do the same kind of thing down here. All right, this paragraph, I'm going to say ID equals pound bottom. All right. And I'm going to have a thing up here that will be right after my H1, I'm going to have another paragraph that says P. Basically, I want to reverse it. Hopefully that made sense. And I want to say, how did we do this? This was ID equal top, PID equal top, and this was PID equal bottom, like that. All right, and where I've got this, that's what I want here. So I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to throw that into here. Kind of a silly example, but I'm just trying to show you what's going on here. So this will say go to bottom. All right, so I'll say go to the bottom and go to the top. All right, so file, save all, and we've got this open already, but I'm going to open it up again in live server. So there's my go to bottom, and notice where I am at the bottom. So this is a way I could jump around in a document. All right, not the greatest of examples, but hopefully at least what I did made a little bit of sense to you. All right. And it's explained in much more depth and breadth of coverage over to here. Okay, the ID equals, all right, and the href, etc. So this is called a placeholder. And as it says right there, to create a placeholder, code an ID attribute you want to jump to. To jump to it, code a link with its href. That's exactly what I just did. All right, how to link to a media file. You can link to just about anything you want. All right, just to show you this, I'm going to grab this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab, this was the chapter 1 to 3 PDF that we were given. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to go into my website here and I'm just going to drop it right there. So paste, oh, it's not letting me paste it. All righty, well, we'll make it work. There. Now I pasted that in. So that's now in there. Okay, there's the PDF. All right, so the author says right here that you can link to that. So ahref equal, so I'm going to do something similar to that. All right, so let me just copy that code. It would be nice if I had the PDF to do that, but I'm going to say ahref equal, and it's right on my main thing there. So it's whatever I call that PDF file, I'll have to change that. And I'll say target equals underscore blank. I'll have it click to see the PDF of chapters 1 through 3, like that. Okay, so I'll have to change this a little bit, but we'll get it to work in just a second. All righty. So I'll put this up near the top so we don't have to be looking for it. All right, so we've got that go to bottom, and right after that, we'll put in this. So I'm going to put in another paragraph tag, and it's got this href equals, and it'll be whatever we called this. So I want to grab that. I don't know. Oh, it's trying to open the PDF inside of here, and that's why it looks so yicky. All right. So it's this .pdf. All right. And we'll see if it works. So what did I do? I said, click to open the, and what should be highlighted is PDF of chapters 1 to 3. And when I click on it, it should actually open the PDF. So let's see. We'll file save. We'll go back here where we ran it. I will refresh. Notice, click to open PDF. I click on here. It opened it up, and it opened it up in a new tab. Okay. There's a lot of different things like this that you're able to do with really without much effort, especially after you've done them once or twice. How to create email and phone links. Let's do this, but before we do this, let's do one more thing. Okay, one more thing, just to show you. And that is, I'm going to go out to YouTube here. There's other ways of doing, better ways of doing this than what I'm going to show you, but just for now, so you see it. All right, let's see. I watched Stephen Colbert, and this was yesterday's monologue. All right, so I'm going to see if we can link to that as well. There we are. All right, and right underneath this, click to open here. I'm going to say, whoops, right underneath that paragraph, I'm going to add another paragraph that's going to say, click to open, and this will be href equals, and that was the href from yesterday. And I'm going to say, Stephen, last night's Stephen Colbert monologue. Okay, and we'll see if this works. Period. It looks like I've got, oh, it looks like it should work. So let's see, file, save all, and we'll look at that. Get rid of this, bring this back up, and I'll close that. All right, and refresh. So let's see if this opens it. So there it is. And I didn't put target equal blank, which I should have. All right, so let's put that in there and see if we can open that up. Again, target equal underscore blank. Whoops, got to be in double quotes, underscore blank. So again, file, save. Go back to our document. Let's back up. Let's refresh. And notice it says CSS box model there. And there's our CSS box model, and boom. So you can link to just about anything. We could link to podcasts. We could link to songs, etc. Okay. And we're going to have a later chapter where we go through this in much more depth and breadth of coverage and learn about better ways of doing it. But I just wanted to show you that for right now. All right, creating email and phone links. All right. And this one right here, I'm going to grab that one and put that in here. So I'm going to say a href equals mail to JP Scott at rankin.edu. SNED, send me an email. And here I'm going to say, click to, okay. All right, so that's the mail to. So let's bring that into our document. And I don't really, well, I'll leave all these out there. Put that one in here as well. So another file, save all. And we'll go in here and we will take a look at it running. There it is. And there's to send me an email. If I click on here, notice what happens. It's going into Outlook and it's going to basically try to open it up. All right. I don't think I've got that configured, but that is the way to do it. Now this tell that's in here, everybody has seen this. All right. So if I go in here and I'm just going to use the example they have. Oops. I'll grab it from here. That up so you can see it. So a href equals um tell, and I'm going to put in my number at Rankin. I'm not there right now, but 314-286-3675. And we'll say, call me. And I will surround this in paragraph tags. And I will say, click to call me. Okay, we'll put that in. All right, that's right here. So again, let's file save all. All right, bring that back up. So click to call me. Making a call. I don't know if it actually is or not. I don't really care. Like, stop it in case it actually was, but that is the way that you do that. All right. You've seen this on sites where, like, if I go to let's say the Pizza Hut site, all right, and I find the one that's near me and I make an order, or want to order, do whatever. There'll be a link in there that says if I want to call them, type of an idea. And that's what they're talking about. Okay. Says phone links don't work on devices that don't have phone capabilities. So this would be more if I was using this on my phone as opposed to on my laptop. All right, the last thing that's discussed in here then is they talk about navigation menus. And all navigation menus is they're a series typically of unordered lists and nested unordered lists. Okay, so if we look at the examples here, this is a vertical thing with unordered lists. All right. Now there is some CSS that's in there, but other than that, it's very similar to what I showed you the other day and what we had on our test. You were supposed to make the 5 web pages, and down at the bottom of the screen, you'd have something that just there was no CSS on them. So it just looked like 5 links. All right. But if you wanted to make them look like this, you could. All right. Says the HTML for a vertical navigation menu is best coded as a series of anchor elements within the LIs of an unordered list. I'd agree with that. A horizontal one, which is what we're going to move to. All right. And there's 2 kinds here. Okay. In this first one, all we've done is we've put this in here, but these are just in there as hyperlinks and we haven't done any formatting. So it pretty much looks like this. Down here, it's the same stuff, but we have basically added CSS to it so that, for lack of better words, they almost look like buttons. All right. So for the first one, all right, notice that we've gone through here and we set the list style type to none. So for both of them, they don't have the dots in front, no padding, text align center. So they're both centered on the page, etc. Okay. Now for the second one, then we've added this. The key component here is display block. All right. And let me show you what that looks like. Okay. And it's the UL. No, I'm going to put it in because I want to make sure I give it to you correctly. All right. So that'll be pound nav. Let's just put everything that they have in here. So I'm going to say menu. In fact, I'm just going to leave it as nav. Nav UL, and I'm going to say in here list style type none. like put them on separate lines. You don't have to do that, especially when there's only one line like this. So we got this. And what else do we have here? We're not going to do any floating. I'm not going to worry about that. So I'm going to say nav ULLIA, and I'll put in here text align center. And I'll say display block. And I will add text decoration none. That should be good. Let's see what I got here. That and this. Copy that on the page that we're working on here. I'm going to throw it into my CSS file. So right here, let's open up the CSS. Now I'm going to do this. It's going to look a little weird. I'm going to put it in right away, almost. All right, but I'm going to take all that stuff that I just put in. I'm going to comment it out. Why? You'll see why right now. Let's go right near the top here, and let's put in a nav. Okay, and we'll put in a href equals index.html, and that'll be our home page. I don't know what I just did there. Oh, okay, so home. All right, so we've got this. We want this, of course, in an unordered list, which I didn't do, but I'll do it right now. All right, so let me tab that over. And this will become an LI. There we go. Now I'm going to add, just put 3 of these in there. We'll keep it simple. I will make 5. All right. And we'll call this about, and we'll call this history. I don't know why. I'm just making all this stuff up. We'll call this order. Now these aren't going anywhere. And we'll call this contact because I'm not making these pages. All I'm trying to do is show you how this is going to look before and after we add some CSS to it. All right, hopefully I've got everything I need in there. So let's do a save all, and then let's go back. And ideally, we're going to have that unordered list. I don't even see it. There it is, right there. Okay, but it doesn't look very nice. Now let's go back, and what we just did in our CSS here, let's uncomment this. Okay, so file, save all, and let's go back in here again. And well, it's getting there. Looks better. I think instead of display block, I think I could be wrong here. It might be inline block. File, save all, and let's look at that. That isn't what I wanted either. So instead of me doing it off the top of my head, let's look and see what they have here. All right, list style type none, text line center, display block. You can code a horizontal, but yeah, you can, yes, that's fine. All right, because I want to show you this, but rather than me fumbling and you watching me fumble, all right, I'm going to say horizontal nav menu W3 schools. Okay, and hopefully it'll find it. Horizontal menu, so something like this. It's just display inline. Isn't that what I had, or did I have display block? I think I know what the problem is if this doesn't work. All right, it's just about there, so let's get it there. All right, it's the LIs, and I think I was putting it on the A's. That's my problem, one of my many. So should have been there. All right, so let's see if that fixed it. There you go. All right, so that's how we moved it over. I thought I put a text decoration none in there. Maybe I didn't. Text decoration none. That one, that text decoration none, that must go under nav, nav ULLIA, because that's what we want to take the text decoration off of is the actual anchor tag. So file, save all, and you should notice now they're gone. Okay. Now again, we could pretty this up, so I could come in here and between these LIs, I could say, for example, padding 5 pixels. Okay. And then we could look at that and it doesn't look like much changed. So let's do a margin 5 pixels. How about this? We'll do a margin. We want to push it to the right. So let's try a margin. We'll try a margin left. Left to 5 pixels. And you can see I've got a little more room now between these. We could set this up any way we wanted to. What I'll do, I wasn't going to do this, but what I'll do is I'll grab this and I will save this out. I'll save this whole page out to a repo. Okay, because we're just about finished here. So if I wanted to make a 2-tier menu, I could basically go in there and inside of here, I could set another thing up. So inside of one of these, I could set another one up. Now I can do that for you, but I don't want to take the time to put in all of the associated CSS. All right, but what it is it's unordered lists inside of unordered lists. And again, there's no limit. You could have a menu that was 6 or 7 deep if you wanted to. They show a 2-tier, then they show a 3-tier. All right, and they give you all the CSS for it. That's it on Monday. Tomorrow is a lab day. Remember, your homework for chapters 1 through 3 is due by midnight on Sunday. All right. And on Monday, we're just going to build a site from scratch. Maybe we'll just build a single landing page, a 1-page site, but it'll look pretty nice, hopefully fairly professional. Okay. I'll talk to you then. Have a good weekend.
You as well, sir.
Thank you.